shape that I really didn't know a lot about public policy as it relates to small businesses. And I really didn't know how public policy at a federal level or at a state level or at even a local level, I'm really not sure I know how it gets done. And as I kind of polled our community of business to small business leaders, I found a lot of folks who were similarly candid in saying, I'm not really sure I know as much as I really should know about what goes on in the making of laws and tax codes and licenses and restrictions and regulations as it relates to small business. And maybe with the millions of small business customers that we all collectively serve, maybe we should know about that a little bit more. So I've assembled this panel that I'm really proud of, that they're generously giving us their time to really talk about from a number of different perspectives and educate all of us on what advocacy looks like as it relates to small business. And all of them are just extraordinary small business advocates in their own right. And they operate at multiple levels and they operate across multiple geographies, many of them nationally. And I think they can, again, take us to school on how to engage, how to lean in to being an active participant in support of small businesses. So I'm going to go around the horn here and make just an introduction. And then if each of you would kind of seize the microphone and give us your best song. No, give us a quick introduction to you and your organizations and tell us a little bit about what you work on as it relates to advocacy on behalf of small business. We'll certainly get into more of that detail as we go along, but just quick intros if you wouldn't mind. So let me start with Jeanette quick first. Jeanette, how are you?
Hi there.
There you go.
There we go. Hi there. Thank you for having us, Dave. This is awesome. And I'm so thrilled to be part of this distinguished panel. So thank you for letting me sneak in here somehow, Dave. So my name is Jeanette Quick. I am an attorney at Gusto. I lead our policy function as well as provide legal and regulatory advice for financial products. Gusto is a people platform that serves over 100,000 small businesses. We provide payroll, health insurance benefits, and most recently, financial health benefits. Before coming to Gusto, I was a senior advisor to Senator Sherrod Brown in his capacity as ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. I was also a senior advisor to Senator Tim Johnson, who was chairman at the time. And before that, I spent time at the OCC, the National Bank Regulator. So I've been thinking about consumer financial issues in small businesses and kind of policy and advocacy for a really long time. It's been really exciting actually over the last, kind of 6 months, thinking about how to best advocate for our small businesses and work together with lots of other organizations like the ones on this panel to do that. So thank you for having me.
Great to have you. John Ahrensmeyer.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for having all of us here. I am the founder and CEO of Small Business Majority, and we've been around for 15 years. And we've pretty much done policy and advocacy the entire time. We were founded initially as a policy and advocacy organization. We now provide a whole host of tools and resources to small businesses across the country, but we've continued to do advocacy, as I said, nationally and in many states across the country. We have offices not only in Washington, but in Atlanta, Chicago, Colorado, and 4 offices in California. As I said, we operate both on a national and a state level, sometimes on a local level as well. And we focus on a number of issues. I know we're going to get into more details. So right now, access to capital is the single biggest issue. And if you just want to turn on the TV or the computer and see the chaos going on the floor of the Senate today, see what we've been up against, try to get something done. We've also focused a fair amount on healthcare, other benefits, paid leave or retirement, tax policy, and sort of other entrepreneurship related business resource factors. So we can get into that, but it kind of runs the gamut. Oh, I will add that we sort of have a 2-pronged system. One is we do a lot of research and both polling and we have a network of 70,000 small businesses. We survey them all the time. and we combine them with their voices, with their, and so it's a combination of the data and the research with the voices of small business. And that's what we project into the media and directly to policymakers. Again, we can get into more detail about that.
That's terrific. Thank you for the explanation. And if anyone wants to really learn more about small business majority, I had the opportunity to interview John and his team, and we have that available as an on-demand presentation starting tomorrow afternoon. So encourage you to go check that out. Next up, Rebecca Menasson. How are you this
very
afternoon?
nice. Thank you. Thank you. I love good pronunciations like that. I am the Director of Research and Policy at the Local Business Institute. We are a new entity, but my two partners and I are not new to local business at all, with a 90+ years combined experience. Before this, I spent almost 20 years creating and working with the Austin Independent Business Alliance. And that's where I really did a lot of our local policy work. And I was director for the past 10 years. And local policy is sometimes wooing and sometimes pounding on desk and whatever's needed. But it's looking at those ordinances that affect life every day for small businesses. But I'm happy to be working on the national level now and have a little different view of it.
Terrific, thank you. And we also have an interview with you, Rebecca, about LBI, and that will be available on an on-demand basis tomorrow. So check that out. Elliot Richardson, I've known you for many years. Talk to us about what you do.
Yes, so thank you so much. So small businesses are the engine that drive the economy. We firmly believe that, and our organization was founded to give the small business community a seat at the table when it comes to public policy. And what we do is we're laser focused on drafting legislation and moving legislation on both a state, federal, and local level that will give small businesses a fair chance to compete and empower businesses to succeed. So we're working on probably 8 or 9 different legislative initiatives right now with both the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and the federal level. And it's a very tough time. It's a tough time for small businesses right now. We've got to help get them through this pandemic. We got to help them recover from this pandemic. There are policies out there that can get it done, and we need the political will and the critical mass to make it happen. So I am very, very thankful to be on this panel. Thank you, Dave, for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to drilling down on some of the specific policy initiatives that will help small businesses.
Terrific. Thank you, Elliot. And last but not least, Eric Groves, founder and CEO of Alignable. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for inviting me. I feel like this is going to be more of an education for me than anyone else out there. This is awesome. Alignable is a social network platform for small business owners to connect and collaborate. And so we have over 6 million small businesses from across North America on the platform. And I guess I would say that the way I look at the way I can contribute to this discussion is I look at myself as really an economic type of policy person. We're collecting data behind the scenes on the impact of the COVID crisis on our members. And so we've captured over 500,000 poll responses since March 12th. We've tracked the impact of COVID as it came up and crossed across the nation. And now, we've tracked the impact of PPP, the amount of cash availability business owners have, and as they look towards recovery, which communities, which industries are recovering and which are not. And so I look at it purely from a numbers perspective. And I'm very thankful the relationships that I've had for many years with Rebecca to really understand the power of grassroots policy creation, and with Jeanette now who's teaching me everything I wanted to know about federal policy creation. So, we're here to support every one of you in the initiatives that you're trying to drive forward and can represent and provide a back channel to millions of small businesses. So exciting to be here.
That's a great summary. And why don't you kick us off? Because I think that to set the stage, at least, giving us some of the high level insights that you've observed over the last 6 months in your Alignable survey? And just to kind of give us the 411 of the survey itself and kind of methodology and who it talks to. But I'm particularly keen on hearing about what small businesses then and now over the last 6 months are saying they need and want from the anyone and everyone, whether it's Washington or their own local community or everything in between. What are they saying that they want?
They want to survive, right? I mean, at the core of it all, they just want to survive, and they want to get through a span of time and a crisis that is very undefined in terms of its nature. And so small business owners, they, at March 12th, when for the most part, this all kicked off, roughly 37% of small business owners had less than a month's worth of cash on hand. And all of a sudden, many of them were forced to close. Many of them took on an enormous economic burden, not of their own making. And they want to know when the end is coming. They want to know when the light at the end of the tunnel is not them closing their business, but an opportunity to recover. And so what we've done is we've tracked the impact on them from a financial standpoint since March. Each month we survey them, we ask them the same set of questions, and we capture data about the impact that they're feeling. Is it subsiding? Is it getting worse? And we were able to track that. We were able to track the impact that the PPP loans had on providing relief. But, in many ways, the PPP loans were like FEMA coming in after a hurricane and putting up a tent. It was only a temporary housing structure. It was only designed to last 8 weeks. And guess what? It's 8 months into this crisis, and these people are out of cash again, and they're struggling to stay in business. And we need to find a way to shorten the period of time that this crisis exists by public policy that really mandates a path towards consumer confidence being rebuilt. And we need to find a way to get these guys the capital that they need in order to get to the end and start to rebuild their businesses. So we've been capturing the data behind all that. We've been capturing which communities are recovering, how they're recovering, what they're doing to recover. We've been looking at the retail sector in the fourth quarter, and the scary statistic that basically 45% of them don't think that they're going to generate the revenue that they need to be in business come January 1st. All of that data is captured in the reports that we pull together, but ultimately it just comes down to survival and having enough financial resources to get there.
That's a great recap. There's one little data point that along the way that you've discovered, and I don't know if it's changed over time, but because this was relatively early on, but it was when you asked small business, where did they think the solution was going to come from? They were very quick to say everybody. They were very quick to say that it comes from the community, it comes from consumers, it comes from government, it comes from really everyone is going to have to pitch in to help us, because if we don't have everybody's help, then frankly we're not gonna make it. Has that evolved, by the way, over time?
Well, I mean, one of the key questions that we just most recently asked was what happened when COVID hit to your purchasing behavior as a consumer? Mm-hmm. And 45% of, these are business owners. We're asking them to put their consumer hat on. 45% of them said that when COVID was at its worst, they had shifted significantly their purchasing from local business to online major retail businesses. And that was caused basically by the concerns over their safety, health and safety. And over 50% of them have said that has not changed. And it's still a huge issue for them. Mm-hmm. And they don't anticipate it changing in 2020, getting any better. So with the case numbers rising, concerns getting greater concerns due to the weather, and being able to congregate outside to support restaurants and the like, it's just going to get more difficult. And that's what's leading to this, sort of forecast that 40 some odd % of these businesses are going to fail. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because there's a whole bunch of business to business businesses that depend on those businesses as customers and clients who are set up to fail as well when those businesses fail. So it's a pretty scary outlook.
And a big domino effect. So I think this might, I hope this is helpful. At least I would love to know the answer to this. Is I'd like to get an understanding of how the sausage gets made in the form of policy at a federal and a state and a local level. And I think that, John, from the perspective of the work that you did as an organization in the origination of PPP, and Jeanette, the experience that you had on the Hill, I'd kind of like to answer that at a federal level, how does policy impacting small business get made? And Elliot, I know you walk the halls of Springfield, Illinois, the General Assembly down there a lot. You've done a lot of incredible advocacy and lobbying in the state of Illinois on behalf of small business. And then Rebecca, you've done it at a very local level for years in Austin. So if we can, giving each other each time to kind of both linger but move on between your answers. John, if you would start really kind of at the federal level, how does it happen? How does it get made? Who speaks with the voice of small business or on behalf of small business to make these policies? You're on mute, John. We got to get you off mute.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's changed a lot in the last 6 months. But traditionally, and I'm sure I speak for everyone else in this call, we have struggled to get at the federal level, certainly, and even sometimes at the state level, to get small business at anywhere near the top of the agenda. I would say that traditionally, legislators on both sides of the aisle have not understood unique small business needs. They all come with their own baggage and perspective from their parties. Small business not being kind of a leading funder or a leading component of maybe a coalition that got them elected. And so we have struggled. And, there've been times when, it's been easier and times when it's been harder. But, there are a number of groups out there, many of them on the call right now, who, have broken through and who do speak, can speak to legislators. As I said, we've found that using the combination of the research and the small business voices has worked very well. Obviously, building coalitions with other business organizations is helpful. Traditionally, federally, outside of the two small business committees, which until this year, nobody really cared that much about, it's been challenging to get to any other committee or any other member you're talking to that isn't normally their top level of concern. And the small business committees until this year have really handled a fairly narrow band of policy, mostly relating to the SBA. And so now that has changed this year. All of a sudden you're seeing small business on the front page of the paper, lead stories in TV broadcasts all over online. And there is a much bigger awareness of small business. I mean, I hate to say it, it's the one silver lining coming out of this than there ever was before. You actually had the small business committees writing the bills, the PPP legislation, and small business has really kind of taken center stage. In fact, we see that on the Senate floor today. So the only silver lining of this is opened up opportunities for all of us. And I'm sure we're all thinking the same way. How can we take that small silver lining in this horrible situation and turn that into some positives moving forward? Again, there's all sorts of specifics that go along with that, but that's kind of been our perspective on a national level. On state level, not quite that extreme, but similar. And I can speak as well on a local level. I'm sure Rebecca has a lot to say about that. But I think on a local level, small businesses have had an easier time of reaching decision makers than on a federal or state level.
Probably. Jeanette, you've obviously walked the halls in the Capitol and worked there and been involved in committees that impact small business. Give us your perspective on, as someone who was both getting policy probably or suggestions presented to them, and now somebody who's actually doing that in reverse, is lobbying yourself.
Yeah, so I think I agree with John's perspective that small business issues have tended to not be the kind of top of the the congressional agenda for many years. And partly this is a function of, all the other things that are going on, but it's also a function of the fact that the small business committees have tended to be a little bit of an afterthought, and they occupy a space that is somewhat kind of like, it's kind of like in between other committees, right? So, for example, to the extent that the small business financing programs are administered by banks, which many of them are, even in regular times, as well as through the PPP program, that will likely come under the jurisdiction of both the SBA as well as the bank regulators, and therefore the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee.
Mhm.
When we're talking about Treasury doing things, that could come under both the Banking Committee and the House Financial Services, as well as the Finance Committee, Senate Finance and House Ways and Means. There's also kind of labor issues that come about when we're talking about small business employees being half of the workforce in the country. So there's kind of like a lot of different committees that are wrangling for kind of who owns certain issues. And so I think that has historically led to gaps, right? So there's, the same way that in the regulatory space, we have gaps between regulators as far as like who's supposed to be protecting consumers or who's doing what. There's similar type of gaps within the congressional committees and congressional staff as far as who owns small business financing, for example, right? Like we've seen in the last few years, as the fintechs have been growing that are providing small business lending, that has tended to come under the jurisdiction of the Banking Committee and House Financial Services, who have been very active in thinking about fintech issues. But they are small business issues as well. And the small business committees have not been as active on thinking about financial services issues. So it is a little bit of I think just kind of like an inherent gap in the way that the committees are structured and sometimes don't always work together as well as I think it may appear from the outside that they should. And that's often not, it's not a result of any kind of like animosity or any hostility or anything like that. It's more just, every committee is kind of going about its business and has their own agenda that they set, and generally may collaborate somewhat on kind of like a party level rolling up, but it may not be as kind of clean or as collaborative as it should be. So that's, I think, a very significant issue. And I think, from the side that I'm sitting on now, which is trying to raise, attention to small business issues, it has been very, very helpful, I think, to always think about how can we continue to raise the alarm about small business issues, and particularly for these staffers that may not be so experienced with small business. So, when I was a financial services staffer, like I said, I mean, I talked about and thought about small business issues occasionally, but it really wasn't my day-to-day. My day-to-day was more on consumer financial issues. And so if someone came through my door telling me about, what was going on with small business finance, that was really valuable to be able to have data reports and information about the actual experience of small business owners, particularly because there are also a lot of intersections, right, between consumer financial issues and small business issues. Many small business owners are actually tapping into personal lines of credit or personal credit cards. And so there's a lot of intersection, I think, that we don't really talk about as much from a policy standpoint. That's very interesting. So we've been focusing at Gusto on how do we provide those data reports that are really going to help tell that story about how there are gaps in funding and needs from small business owners that are going unaddressed. I know that Eric's reports at Alignable have also been really helpful to tell that story. Gusto has been putting out monthly reports for the last 6 months on the state of small businesses that are on our platform. We've seen a lot of really interesting information about, kind of tracking a little bit what we've seen nationwide as far as, a big drop off in employment in the early months of the crisis, and then somewhat of a retrenchment and hiring back. But we have seen, for example, that many of the people that were furloughed in the early months of the crisis still haven't been hired back. We're also seeing a lot more interesting kind of data around the fact that even if they've been hired back, they're actually coming back at lower wages and lower number of hours. So this is the kind of granularity we try to provide to congressional office to give them information.
And do you think that level of granularity is helpful to them, or do their eyes glaze over?
So I think it was most helpful to them the first kind of 3 or 4 months. I actually this morning was on the phone with some folks from DC who basically said, listen, it's still helpful, but everyone is going through COVID fatigue, right? Like, and that
Right,
includes
right.
policymakers. And, you know, as we're kind of in this period where it seems less and less likely that there's going to be a deal before the election, our marching orders are basically, you know, how do we think about surfacing this information at the right time? So it may be that right now the right time is after the election, when there's going to be opportunity to do, you know, kind of lame duck relief. And in the meantime, what we're focusing on is how do we continue to tell these stories, let people know that, you know, just because the overall unemployment numbers are looking good and many of the states and cities are opening back up, there's still a lot of really real pain out there for small businesses, and continuing to highlight that for policymakers is helpful.
So Elliot, I want to move the talking stick over to you and really tell us how policy is made at a state level as relates to small business, and what are the areas that it focuses on primarily, and what are kind of the processes it goes through as bills and tax codes and those kinds of things are passed along.
Yeah, so it's a great question. You know, first of all, when you want to move policy at all, I mean, you really got to put on your helmet and get ready to knock your head into the wall and over again, because it never happens the first time. I'm sure the folks on this Zoom know that it doesn't happen the second time. So, you know, people ask me this question a lot because we have moved some really good policies in Illinois. We passed some good laws. So once we get an idea, and generally that comes from the community, right, about something that will really help their business, then you got to figure out how you're going to drive that down the center of the field in Springfield. So the first thing you need always is critical mass. I mean, if you think you're just going to have a lobbyist and go to Springfield and move a piece of legislation without people getting behind that, without action calls, without engagement, at least the small business community isn't going to do that. I mean, what always makes me optimistic is as a community, we're really big. I mean, there's a lot of small businesses out there. There's a lot of independent contractors, a lot of gig employees. And when you galvanize, you can really get something done. So the first thing we do is we try to build critical mass. Once we've got that critical mass, we go to legislators and, you know, we draft our ideas for a bill and we ask them to sponsor it. And more times than not, they do. And once they do, we're able to get that bill filed and start securing co-sponsors. I think part of our success has been we're nonpartisan. And that actually enhances our ability to influence legislators because neither side can take us for granted. I mean, we're not endorsing candidates, but we are thanking the candidates, the politicians, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, who support our ideas. And we're asking those who don't, why. So being nonpartisan gives us a little bit of unpredictability, and it also allows us to bring people together. I mean, we have a property tax task force in Illinois right now. Illinois has very, very high property taxes. And we have 3 Democrats on that task force. We have 3 Republicans on that task force. We have our members on that task force. And I'll tell you, they really talk in unison together when you get out of that political sort of nonsense that can go on in Springfield. And that's how we've been able to move a lot of good policies. So, you know, there is a process. You learn the process, you galvanize, you push respectfully, but very hard to get it done until it gets done. And that is how we've been able to move some good policy in Illinois.
So are in the critical mass I get, do you find that in the same way that Jeanette was describing, that the research, the data, the information, is that really helpful at a state level? Or is it really more just simply the constituents in a large majority saying, hey, we really want to do this?
Both. I mean, you got to do the math. I mean, and you got to have the data. So we're pushing for a tax credit right now in Illinois that would incentivize small businesses to retrain and hire individuals who have lost their jobs or their businesses. I mean, a lot of people have lost their businesses and they're not coming back because of COVID, right? So what we have to do is run the numbers and show that, hey, in 1 year, that tax credit is going to be revenue positive because, you know, we've got a lot of people running that ball down the center of the field. But then when legislators say, you know, Illinois is not exactly a fiscally sound state right now.
Mm-hmm.
So how's that going to work? We have to show, hey, this is a jobs bill. This is an investment in Illinois' future. and give it a year or give it 2 years at a higher tax incentive level, and we're going to be making money for the state. So you've got to have, we have people, we have interns, we have policy folks who do the research to make the case for the policy. But then, I mean, once it's on the table, you've got to have people sending emails to legislators. You have to have chambers of commerce reaching out to legislators in their districts. And it's the same on a city level when you're trying to push an ordinance. And when that pressure becomes so great that the politicians really have to pass a piece of legislation for their constituents, and that becomes more important than politics, that's when you can really have some success.
Terrific. Thank you. Rebecca, sorry it took a while to get around to you, but answer the same questions that these guys have been answering, but on a local level.
Well, I would echo just about everything that everyone has said. And at local level, one of the things that we did here in Austin was change the dynamics by changing small business to local business. And it may seem like semantics, except it implies from a city council member or a legislator ownership, in the sense that they're our local businesses. They're not just small business. The feds define small business because of the census, but what we look at as small business, we'd love to see it redefined to under 100 employees, because right now it's under 500 employees. And I think to most of us in our communities, a 500 employee business is not a small business. To most people, it's pretty big. But again, echoing what others have said, that it takes determination, stubbornness, accuracy on your data. And I think one of my favorite words is compelling. And compelling to me includes all the data, all of the reasons why these people should vote for you. So here's why you need to pay attention to them. It's that local ownership that makes a difference. And it is hard. We started out at AIBA, the Austin Independent Business Alliance. 20 years ago, nobody talked about local business. And to them, small business was the filigree that filled in between the big businesses, because all the economic development focus was on getting big business to move to our community, and nothing was focused on small business. We were able to redirect that quite a bit to local business. But in terms of actual advocacy, it comes in 3 channels. If you build the necessary relationships, you can get in on the beginning of legislation or ordinances or policies. And that's where you can be most effective, when you get to the point where city council calls you and says, okay, what is your group going to think about this? We're looking at doing this. And then you can point out some of the good parts, the bad parts, the ugly parts, whatever it is you have to say. That's the best place to be. Sometimes it's coming in and trying to change something that already exists that's causing problems for local businesses. And then sometimes it is new legislation that you come in and say, this is an issue, here's what we're trying to solve, here's a policy that could help to solve this. And just like Elliot was saying, it is a numbers game on both ends. Do your numbers support something that makes sense to people in office? And can you produce the numbers of people to suit up and show up, or write emails or make phone calls, so that they see that this has a big support? At the Local Business Institute, we're turning what all of y'all do upside down just a bit, because instead of going after national legislation, federal legislation, we're working on a program called the Local Economic Policy Project, that looks at what's working in communities across the country in terms of local policy, and how can we duplicate that and make that available and easy for other communities to do. So in other words, y'all are all working at the top of a pyramid. We're looking at the bottom, but if we can enact policies that are friendly to local businesses at the local level and the state level, then we can follow that at the federal level, because then we have actual data of what the policies are, how they work, how they've been working, and what they do for these communities.
That's terrific. I'm going to ask you guys, and we go back around the horn again. And if you could keep your answers a little briefer, so we make sure that everyone gets a chance to hold the talking stick around the circle. But I guess I'd like to ask you as best you can, what do you think are if you had to pick one or two policies that were really going to make an impact on small business recovery, what would they be? And we'll kind of go in reverse order here. So Rebecca, at a local level, what are the local policies that you think would really make a difference? And then Elliot at a state level, and then Jeanette and John at a federal level. And Eric, then from your perspective, because I know you've thought a lot about it and written a lot about it, what are the kinds of policies that you think the Alignable community is really looking for, the help that they're looking for? So Rebecca, why don't you kick us off as we go back around?
If we're looking at a purely local perspective, I would say more grants to local business, more help with their landlords and their leases. That's a huge area that they're facing. When the PPP loans came out, yes, they were a help, but they put the burden of unemployed numbers back onto the small businesses back. Instead of people being able to go on unemployment rolls, you had to keep the employees to get the PPP funding, which kept the unemployment rolls down a little bit, but also put that on your back. And that lasted, as Eric pointed out, for 8 weeks, and then that was gone.
Right.
And there's the real fear that a year from now, we'll see so many local businesses going under because of the debt that they took on during this time, that their business can't support that kind of debt. And they may have been perfectly healthy, happy businesses before then. So those kinds of relief packages of just how can we add stability, not to make anybody rich, not to make them have their best year ever, but just to bring stability to those businesses and therefore their employees. And that comes in, frankly, grants, maybe zero interest loans, and rent stability. Their leases are killing them.
Okay. Elliot, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I just want to say local communities. I mean, Rebecca really hit it on the head. And when you look at what happened during the PPP process, right, and you saw local communities in disadvantaged areas not have access to those PPP loans. One of the things we want to do in the state of Illinois and locally is let's get some financial institutions into disadvantaged communities so that the people, the entrepreneurs in those communities can form relationships with banks and financial institutions so they are not always last in line, because that was really bad for the communities that needed economic growth the most. Property owners, if the feds can't do something to help small property owners who have not been paid rent because their small business tenants are struggling, then the state has to step into it, because what we're going to have is a foreclosure crisis, because these property owners are not going to be able to pay their mortgages. I mean, I'd love to see, and John can talk about maybe, I don't know, the Restart Act and some other things on a federal level, but the state will need to step in and help small property owners. And the RISE Act, this is a tax credit for technology companies and manufacturing companies and medical companies that can retrain and hire lost their jobs, that can't get another job, people in theater, people in music, maybe private security guards for events that aren't happening. Let's retrain them. Technology companies, manufacturing companies, they need employees right now. We need people who have to get back to work. So we feel passing that bill, the RISE Act on the state level, is incredibly important. And there's occupational licensing reform to open up new fields for people who have lost their jobs. Obviously, I can talk too long, Dave, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hand that talking stick over to somebody else. But no shortage of policies that can help right now.
Those are all really good and somewhat obvious. I hope those get taken up. Jeanette, from your perspective, what do you think? Given what you've seen, where would you really direct at a national level the policy discussion?
Yeah, so I think a couple different things. So I think as we're seeing that the federal policy making has somewhat slowed down, I think it is really important to engage on that state and local level. So we're thinking about how do we take the lessons of PPP and apply it to the state level. So we've spent a lot of time syncing up with state financial regulators, but also state agencies, tax agencies, as well as employment agencies, to figure out how to help them move faster and be more efficient and provide more information to them. So something that I think is really interesting is thinking about how can companies like ours, so whether it's payroll companies or third-party providers that provide small business services, how can we sync in with these agencies and state authorities to provide information? One example is, we can validate layoffs, we can validate reduction in hours and wages, verify unemployment, things like that. So we've been talking a lot to state agencies on that front. We also recently wrote an op-ed where we synced up with the Hispanic, Asian, and Black chambers to advocate for there to be more funding on the state level for basically a California version of a PPP. And I think there are kind of like lessons that we can take from the rocky rollout, somewhat of PPP to figure out how to do it better on the state level. So I think that's something that we've gotten some interest from state policymakers on what that would look like and how to kind of set aside some funding, particularly for underserved businesses that were, kind of largely left out in many ways of PPP. So that's, I think, something that's very critically important, is to think about how to focus on some of these large states that will have additional funding to fill those gaps for PPP. And then on the federal level, I think, continuing to think about as the kind of realm of the possible narrows somewhat, we're continuing to think about how to make PPP better and the forgiveness side of it better, because that is something that I think a lot of businesses are in this kind of wait and see period where, they've already spent their money down and the forgiveness process is still completely opaque. So there's a lot of work to be done, and not just engaging with congressional stakeholders, but also with SBA and Treasury and thinking about forgiveness, right? So we've also been part of a number of small business advocacy groups in asking for there to be the second draw PPPs available for small businesses that may have already spent their money, as well as streamlined forgiveness possibilities for those businesses that have taken out less than $150,000 in PPP, because we do think that it's critically important to make sure that businesses are able to use their capital and to plan for the future. And many of them are not able to right now while they're thinking about, am I going to get my loan forgiven or not? So I think that's really important to continue to pressure federal policymakers on that front.
Okay, John, over to you. What are the policies, the one or two policies that you think really need to be advanced right now on behalf of small business?
Yeah, well, I would agree with what everybody has said today, so I won't repeat any of that. And particularly, Jeanette talked about the states stepping in, and we've also been very much a part of the effort in California to do kind of a California version of the PPP, if you will, as she described. And also would agree with her totally on what's needed kind of around the PPP itself, around forgiveness, second by the Apple, et cetera. So I'm going to kind of agree with everybody and talk just very briefly about some longer term things coming out of this we really need to be looking at. We're really talking about a system of more patient and flexible capital. And the federal government's in the best position to kind of both underwrite and guide that, just because of the amount of money they have, the flexibility. States have to have balanced budgets, et cetera. So the Restart Act is a great start in that direction. But and we need to look at there's like 50 programs across the federal government that in one way or another support small businesses, agriculture, commerce, SBA, obviously, Treasury. We need to get some coordination and collaboration between those programs. There also needs to be, back to the state level, there needs to be effective federal support of state and local programs like the SSBCI program that was very effective following the last recession, where money was provided to entities at the state level to loan. Almost $10 billion got out, and it was very effective. We need to look at capacity building for CDFIs and other mission-driven lenders. Even if you throw a lot of money at them, they may not have the capacity to deal with that. And we need to really look at how we address the unbanked and the underbanked section of the population, particularly entrepreneurs of color, women, and immigrants. And finally, we need to look at the issue of responsible lending. We've passed a bill in California that's now being implemented around truth in lending. There's a bill that's just passed in New York. There's a bill that's been introduced in the House of Representatives to deal with that. So I'm just sort of touching on the surface, but these are sort of the long-term things that we need to do on top of all of the other stuff that everyone's mentioned here.
You used a phrase, I got to write it down because it's really good. Patient and something capital.
Flexible.
Patient and what?
Flexible.
Patient and
one of the problems with the PPP program is, you know, there is, as Jeanette's already mentioned, or somebody else has mentioned, the, you know, I guess it was actually Rebecca mentioned it, the fact that so much had to go to payroll, it was limited, the time was limited. Small business owners don't need that, especially in a crisis. We're coming out of a crisis, trying to rebuild. We need capital to be as flexible as possible, and patient, meaning, you know, either no or low interest or repayment for X period of time, and then slightly higher rate. Something that, as somebody else has said here, enables them to get back on their feet and get rolling. So, I mean, ultimately, you know, we want the private sector to come take back over and have it be a more normal system with, you know, appropriate government involvement. But right now, the government has a unique role it can play, both at every level, federal, state, and local, to really facilitate and provide funding and backstopping of a lot of different types of instruments out there that maybe wouldn't be profitable for the private sector to do on its own, but we can use the infrastructure of the private sector if with a little bit of support from government.
So Eric, to you, what are small businesses saying they need in the form of policy and or mandate?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm not sure they're really focused on policy at this point. I think I go back to that notion of just, I need to survive. And I think the first step in that process is getting a control over consumer confidence. And the very fact that small business owners themselves are not feeling comfortable going into a local business community and shopping at the level that they would normally be doing over fears for their own safety. And so the number one thing that we can do to shorten the amount of time needed for survival is to have a public policy that gets the case numbers under control. And, you know, whether that's mandating masks or providing testing. I mean, if you think about it, you know, wouldn't it be nice if on Main Street you could get tested as easily as a politician in Washington or an NFL sports team, right? It's kind of sad that the people in this country can't have access to the testing and the solutions that are afforded to the people that are supposed to represent us and are playing sports for us. So that's the number one thing that I think small businesses are looking for, is just they want to know when the end of the survival period is. When does the hurricane pass, so that we can start to rebuild our businesses? And depending on how long that is, they're going to need a bridge, right? And the bridge is either in the form of it coming sooner, or we give them relief capital. And I think others have touched on the need to do that well. I think the other things that I would add to it is we need to basically take major money center banks out of the equation, right? They did a horrific job of taking care of small business. Local and regional banks were really the people that had the small business owners' backs. You know, the major money center banks literally made hundreds of millions of dollars in fees taking care of their clients. And at the end said, oh, okay, let's take care of the small business owner. Well, they should pay the price for doing that and not be included in the next go round. Let's use the financial institutions that actually did the right thing. And finally, I think that we need to look to the future and build some kind of system where small business owners can build up a financial reserve. And this is one of the things I've been talking with Jeanette about, because I look at it from an economic perspective, which is, wouldn't it be nice to have a small business kind of IRA, where as a business owner, I could put money on a tax deferred basis or tax-free basis into a fund that is available to me in the event of a disaster or an economic impact, where the state or the federal government says, yes, you can draw against those funds. And maybe I could build up to a year's worth of capital in that entity. Because right now, the tax code and the way businesses are run is basically, you don't want to generate revenue. You want to either pay it out to yourselves or invest it in your business. because there's no incentive to build up a financial reserve. And when you only have 30 days of cash and a crisis that lasts for 9 months or longer, you know you're going to be in a world of hurt. So, I've been trying to kind of formulate what that might look like and put it in hands of very capable people like Jeanette, who can think about how would you actually turn this into policy, but and Rebecca at the local level. But I think it's the combination of those three things plus what everybody else talked about that would make a difference.
Wow. I could go around this group for another couple of hours because I appreciate the education you're giving me on things I just simply desperately wanted to know about. And I'll end by going around and asking what you're all addressing a large community of professionals whose job it is to sell to small businesses at a very large scale, nationally, many times in the millions. What can they do to help you? And I'll start with Elliot. I'll start with you, and kind of bounce around a bit here.
Yeah, it's not really helping. It's a great question, Dave. And it's not really helping us, it's helping small businesses, right? So what can they do? I firmly believe that a business right now, a small business, is not interested in a credit card because it's got a sports team on it, right? One of the reasons we started the SBAC is because, we would see commercials by some of the institutions that might have been mentioned with, a baker running around talking about small business. We want larger companies to provide real support to the small business community right now, whether that's time, whether that's resources, whether that's capital. If there was ever a time to step up to the plate for people's small business clients, their small business vendors, their small business family members, the small business community, this is it. Find an organization. It could be any of the organizations here. It could be a local chamber of commerce. Support them. Support them so they can support the businesses that don't know if they're going to be around in 2 months. And that's what I would say. Get in the game, but not on a peripheral level and not on an aesthetic level, right? Really get in there and help small businesses with the resources that bigger companies have, because that will create the loyalty that they are looking for from small businesses. We will not forget the help and lack thereof.
So Rebecca, over to you. What can these large organizations do to help you?
Do business with small business themselves instead of doing such large vendors. Look at small vendors and how they can help those small vendors, and then pay your bills on time to those small vendors, because it makes a difference to them. For the Institute, we are really looking for funding for this local economic policy program that is a national program that's going to take 2 years to do. But I think it can give us such important insights and such a groundswell of building on policies that exist in small places now. That helps us help businesses. As a nonprofit, that just all goes back into the community to help them.
And John, how about you?
Well, I would agree with what's been said. I mean, to the extent that large businesses can actually have a direct impact, whether that's purchasing or whether that's actually providing money, a lot of the big financial institutions have stepped up and are providing resources either directly or through their foundations. And that's all important. I would also add, they're unfortunately listened to often more than small businesses in the corridors of power. And they need to get behind some of these policies that we've all been talking about. They need to say, look, our health, the health of the country, the health of our businesses, the health of our families, et cetera, depends upon a survived and strong small business sector. And they need to put their muscle behind some of these policies, working hand in hand with all of us, because that is going to go a long way. We've been working with Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, and who's been sending all sorts of letters out with small business support. But he's also pulling together large business support for the the PVP and the Restart Act, et cetera. We need more of that. We need more of big and small business coming together to work together, because at the end of the day, it isn't, you know, just the right thing to do. It's the right thing economically to do for these businesses.
Jeanette, I guess I'll ask you with a kind of a different angle, which is really more on the not what we can do to help Gusto, but what can we do? Do you believe what can the B to SMB community do to assist in some of the things that you talk about? So just briefly, give us what you think we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with what Rebecca and John mentioned, which is that we can encourage large businesses to do business with small businesses. And particularly, I want to plug, you know, the Black and Latinx owned businesses that have been really impacted more dramatically than white-owned businesses. Sorry about that. There's a website I want to plug called buyblack.us, and that's buy as in BY, byblack.us, which is a list of Black-owned businesses. So to the extent we can you know, help prop up businesses that have been impacted, I think large businesses should do that. I also think that having large businesses advocate for small business issues, you know, so something that I think is really interesting as we're heading into this winter period is how many small businesses are going to be impacted by the winter and not be able to operate outdoors. And you know, there's something that can be done as far as providing, you know, additional grants, additional tax credits, additional thinking about how to help businesses survive the winter specifically. And I think that large businesses, you know, they have powerful lobbying groups, they have big voices, they can kind of lift up their voices there to bring more attention to the plight of small businesses and inability to last the winter. So I think that's something that large businesses should really think about.
Guys, oh, wow. I mean, this has been absolutely fantastic. And I think that I want to have you all back, and I want to, you know, continue this dialogue, continue this conversation. You know, I've mentioned to each of you that I think it's time for the Institute, on behalf of its membership, to stand up some form of advocacy council that really can help to shape what the response is, frankly, from large enterprises, which are all the things that you've all mentioned. And I think that we can start to communicate that better out to the leadership of a lot of our large brand members. And I have a very strong confidence that they will embrace it. This has been terrific. And I want you guys to feel comfortable in, you know, writing bylines for our blog, or for submitting any kind of information that you have on your organizations and what you're working on, so that we can frankly all get acclimated to what you guys are working on as kind of part of our daily feed, and really become engaged with it. Thank you guys so much for doing this. This will be recorded and available on demand. Please share it, I hope, with your constituencies. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Dave.
It's been a pleasure. And if anybody needs access to the data that doesn't already have it, please reach out. Be more than happy to get it to you.
I would love that, Eric. Thank you so much.
John, thank you very much for everything that you do. And Jeanette, thank you as well for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Take
having me.
care.
Take care.